Joining me now to discuss it is TalkTV's chief political commentator, Peter Cardwell. Hello, welcome to the show. And of course, Benedict Spence, is still with you by your side. You can be Peter.
Mini Peter.
Mini Peter.
Shrink slightly.
It's all gone horribly wrong already. Right, PMQs. Were there highlights? First question.
Not really.
OK, thanks a lot. We're going to move on to a different item. I've been longing to do that.
There was a pretty sombre PMQs because, first of all, they both paid tribute to Alexei Navalny. Then Keir Starmer talked about Henry Staunton, who was the chairman of the Post Office, who was sacked by Kemi Badenoch, and asked...
But has he been murdered in a gulag as well?
Not yet.
OK, I'm just checking.
No, he hasn't. But he asked Rishi Sunak if he would repeat the allegations that Kemi Badenoch did, that Mr Staunton had lied. There's a war of words between them. And then it moved on to who knew what when, basically under the Cameron administration in regard to the Post Office. So most of it was about the Post Office, a little bit about the infected blood scandal as well. Essentially, when's the compensation coming for these people who've been so badly treated? Yeah,
exactly. The compensation is just not there at all. Well, let's have a little watch and a listen of one of their exchanges.
This week we also learned that a 2016 investigation into whether Post Office branch accounts could be altered before it was completed. Now, had that investigation revealed that they could be altered, which we now know to be the case, the livelihoods of those wrongly prosecuted could have been saved. What did government ministers know about it at the time?
Mr Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition has picked one particular date, but it is worth bearing in mind that this scandal has unfolded over decades, Mr Speaker, and it was actually following a landmark 2019 High Court case that the previous government established a statutory inquiry.
Yeah, so it looks a bit subdued, as you say.
Yeah, and a real lack of detail there from Rishi Sunak. He was asked as well in the second clip we're going to look at in regard to who knew what when, and also has Rishi Sunak had a chat with David Cameron? He's in South America at the moment, as you said, but what has he said to David Cameron and to a minister in the Cabinet Office at the moment, who was the Post Office Minister at the time, about this scandal? Has he got any information
I
on
wonder,
that?
though, whether this has now become a real Westminster issue. I mean, look, when we saw Mr Bates versus the Post Office, that really brought to light a story that actually people say, why have the media not been talking about this? The media have been talking about it for many, many years. Lots of documentaries, and we covered it on the show here a few years ago. But that really brought it to light, and it really made it real for people about the absolute tragedy of what had happened to so many, I mean, thousands of postmasters and sub-post mistresses as well. And then there's the compensation, and then we now got this delay. I wonder if this story is now getting too much into sort of he said, she said. You're talking about even in the case of Henry Staunton, somebody who wasn't even there when most of these prosecutions was happening, was late in the day. Yes,
I think you're right. It's a who knew what when kind of thing. And also, look, a real cynic, a really cynical attitude would be that Keir Starmer doesn't want to talk about Gaza today. And that's why he got this issue, which basically everybody agrees in, and asked, as we'll see now with Rishi Sunak, what did David Cameron knew and has he had a chat with him?
Let's have a watch and listen to that clip.
Mr Speaker, this information about 2016 has just come to light, I think, this week, which is precisely why I'm asking about it. Exactly. Considering the Prime Minister's Foreign Secretary was running the government in 2016, and one of the Prime Minister's current Cabinet Office ministers was the Post Office Minister, has he thought to ask either of them what they knew in 2016?
No, Mr Speaker. We did...
Oh, do we not get to Rishi Sunak's response there? I thought we did.
We're getting Rishi Sunak's answer, but
we're not going to get his response there. Yeah,
okay.
It's basically, he said the important thing is, of course, that the government gets the right compensation, so that people get the right compensation they deserve. We know that is not happening yet. I do feel, I mean, this story is going to run and run, but as you say, interesting that he's gone on this story, Keir Starmer, again, and not Gaza. That's the really big event in the Commons today. Although, weirdly, a really big event that will have no influence whatsoever on the actual events.
Julie, are you telling me that Benjamin Netanyahu doesn't care what Joanna Cherry of the SNP thinks about whether he should have a ceasefire or not? Is military strategy Stephen Flynn?
Not based on that. I know. I'm sorry to break this to you, folks. We've been talking about this on the show all morning, and genuinely, I'm still absolutely flabbergasted by it. I'm going to try and find the quotes. These different motions, they're quite lengthy motions, aren't they? And they're not. The vote's going to happen, between 4 o'clock and 7 o'clock?
Yes.
We still don't know from Sir Lindsay Hall, the Commons Speaker,
which amendments have been chosen.
But we know the SNP motion itself.
I think there's still some horse trading going on behind the scenes on that one.
There's definitely a lot, isn't there? But this is the key difference. The SNP motion calls for an immediate ceasefire. those two words, immediate ceasefire. It also condemns what they call the collective punishment of Palestinians, clearly by the Israeli military. Labour, their amendment, it says that Israel's planned assault on Rafah must not take place. This is what's going to be taking place to root out the last Hamas fighters in the south of the country, where, of course, more than 1 million refugees have been evacuated, were told to go there. They've also demanded what they call an immediate humanitarian ceasefire, different from an immediate ceasefire, which is what the SNP want, to be observed by all sides. There are only two sides. There's an Israeli government and their military, and there's the Hamas terrorists. Tories, though, are urging an immediate humanitarian pause and is backing Israel's right to self-defence. What is the difference between an immediate ceasefire, an immediate humanitarian ceasefire, and an immediate humanitarian pause?
Not a huge amount, really, and there's a lot of dancing on the head of a pin. There's a lot of politicking going on here, and in fairness, that's what happens in Parliament. What this has got to do with the safety and security of Israel and the humanitarian sort of future of people in Gaza, innocent civilians in Gaza, is not clear. I'm sure the people putting forward these motions do care, but at the same time, the SNP is just making life difficult for the Labour Party. The Conservative Party is making difficulties for the Labour Party as well. There's a lot of sort of inside Westminster politics in this, and not a huge amount.
None of which
really
is going to save a single Palestinian child's life. No, I mean that's the thing. Now we mentioned this a bit earlier to Jake Wallace-Simons, the previous guest, that the SNP Westminster leader, who's a fantastic performer in the Commons, Stephen Flynn. He's been ramping up the rhetoric, and he described it today as a pro-life motion. He said it's protecting civilians from the death and destruction of one of the most advanced militaries on the planet. Now, we know that Israeli Defence Forces are firing missiles into Gaza and into southern Gaza, where people have been evacuated. And anyone right-thinking person has got concerns about the safety of civilians, certainly in refugee camps. They've been told to go there for their safety, and then they're facing bombing. That clearly is unacceptable. However, we also know Hamas fighters are hiding among the civilian population. But we also know that Hamas is still firing rockets into Israel. And the reason why we're not having Israeli deaths and destruction is because of their ability to protect themselves.
Yes.
There seems to be this idea that, well, because the Israelis are better armed and better defended, that what they're doing is more wrong than what Hamas is doing.
Yes, there is this kind of moral equivalence idea and this question, really, about whether Israel's response has been proportionate, whether it's too much. Benjamin Netanyahu obviously wants to eradicate Hamas. That's what he wants to do. Hamas wants to eradicate Israel. This is a standoff. They're not going to come to a ceasefire anytime soon.
Whose side should we be on? Let me wonder.
Prince William's obviously intervened in this as well.
Did that come up at PMQs at all?
It didn't come up at all, actually, and the Israeli embassy responded overnight and said, look, the war has to stop, and also the hostages have to be released. 134 of them Israeli citizens still under Hamas.
And God knows what. And we know that people are being starved. We know some people who've left.
Rape is a weapon of war.
Yeah, and again, they get back a lot of the children and elderly, and they kept the men, but they've also kept all the younger women, which is a particular concern, we know. In terms of what does happen this afternoon then, do you think it is likely that we will see the Labour amendment being voted on as well? Because there is this concern from the Labour Party. I mean, I have to say, I've been almost impressed with Keir Starmer sticking to a line for longer than he normally would, because he's Mr. Flip-Flop. He sits on the fence, and then when he has to take a side, he flip-flops either side. Quite difficult when you've still got that fence post up your backside. But we remember last November, that SNP motion that caused a lot of disconcern, just problems for Keir Starmer, when 56 Labour MPs rebelled against the Labour whip on it. 10 resignations from the front bench. No one can remember a single one of those names because they're all complete no marks. It wasn't
Jess Phillips.
Oh, Jess Phillips. But yeah, did anyone remember she was on the front bench?
Jess Phillips did.
She
wouldn't stop going on about it.
Yeah, oh, yeah. You make a fair point, chaps. I'll give you that one, Benedict. Is there a concern that if Labour don't get their amendment, so they can get their MPs to vote on that they've actually put that word ceasefire in, that Keir Starmer will be more fearful about headlines tomorrow saying, Labour don't support a ceasefire in Gaza.
Yes, I think so. Also a split within the Labour Party. If they get their own amendment put forward, Keir Starmer's thinking is, well, that's great, all my MPs can then vote for that and there won't be a split the way there was a few months ago. If only the SNP motion is selected, well, then he'll be in trouble because he'll want people not to vote for that, but many people will vote for that. Maybe 56, maybe more.
And what do we think Sir Lindsay Hoyle is going to do? Because, I mean, there's lots of talk about parliamentary precedent, because these things aren't written in stone. He is, although he's an independent, he is a Labour MP. He was elected originally as a Labour MP, sits as an independent now, of course, in the Commons Speaker's chair. But do you think it's likely that he will give Keir Starmer that help?
I think he will. I think he's going to choose the Labour amendment. We may
and
well
the
see,
Conservative amendment.
And we can see the Conservative amendment as well. This is an issue where there are
they've wasted enough
small...
time in the Commons on this stuff. They may as well waste a bit more.
Yeah, I mean, there's been as you pointed out earlier, very small gradient-style changes in terms of what the amendments actually say, and I think we'll perhaps see 3 votes later
Meanwhile, in case anyone noticed, we've got a cost of living crisis still. We've got government. We've got a country in recession. We've got a housing crisis, NHS crisis. I mean, you name it, everything else going on in this country. But, you know...
This is meaningless virtue signalling and won't save a single life in Gaza, but it makes MPs feel good about themselves.
Yeah, exactly. Benedict Spence?
Well, that's exactly it, isn't it? And I think that, you can find a wafer difference between a humanitarian pause and a ceasefire, but between 2 different kinds of ceasefires, there's not too much point to that. So it would actually be quite amusing, with the SNP having laid this trap for Labour, if Lindsay Hoyle just went, all right, I'm going to allow the Labour motion and not yours, and then what are you going to do? You're going to have to side with Sir Keir Starmer, presumably, or abstain and say no ceasefire in Gaza.
All utterly meaningless. And that's the ridiculous thing, isn't it? Chaps, thank you very much, Peter Cardwell and Benedict Spence. Do stay with me, though. Well, we're going to get a reaction to what Prince William had to say. He's facing criticism for calling for an end to the fighting in Gaza. Some are saying he's naive, it's all a bit kumbaya. Others are saying that he was getting himself rather too involved in politics for a royal. Want to know what your reaction is? Give us a call on 0344 499 1000. Text on 87222. Get in touch on X at TalkTV. Joe's done just that and says his grandmother wouldn't have done it, but the world marches on. Why criticise a call for peace? Alistair says William's comment shows his naivety in politics. And Owen says asking for peace in a war zone is hardly controversial. No, you see, it is. It depends on the terms. You've also been getting in touch on the phones. Keep those calls coming in, please. Let's go to Leisha, who is in London. Hello, Leisha.
Hi there.
Hello.
Hi.
What do you want to say?
Well, I think that there's a point that's not really being discussed, which is if they do go for a ceasefire or they push Israel into having a ceasefire, that gives a green light to any terrorist group who want to storm into a neighbouring country, take hostages, murder, rape, etc., in order to get their political ideas met. But also, it's rewarding taking human hostages. I mean, it's also rewarding having human shields, using Palestinians as human shields.
Exactly, and that's the thing. The argument being, you're not allowed to attack a hospital or a school or residential buildings, except where there is a military target there. And Hamas have been playing on this.
Yeah, and no one seems to ever mention the terror tunnels that are 30 kilometres of terror tunnels under Gaza. They have turned Gaza into basically a military operation. It's horrendous, and people who have family in Israel and the Israelis are really worried. But on top of that, we've also got the brainwashing of young people in this country and around the world who seem to think that this is a freedom-fighting operation.
Yeah, I'm with you all the way. It's absolutely terrifying when they're polling of young people about what they think about this and their views on Israel and indeed, let's face it, the blatant anti-Semitism we're seeing on our streets every single week as well. Leisha, thank you so much for your call. Appreciate that. Good reaction from Peter Cardwell to that.
Yeah, well, I think there's a huge amount of anti-Semitism on a lot of our campuses as well. I think we're seeing that.
Oh, we've seen the University College of Lecturers Union have called on their pension investors to divest from Israel. Again, I don't remember. Have they done that with every other country where there's been a war?
Yeah, I always find it interesting when people don't want to invest in Israel and want to boycott Israeli products. There were incredible technological and scientific advances in brain surgery out of Israel, some of the finest surgeons in the world. So if you find yourself with a brain tumour and you say, no, do you know what, I'm boycotting Israel, just say, no, I don't want those techniques used on me, thanks.
Yeah, absolutely.